Hi, my name is Matthew Carnegie, and as always, I say, keep the faith. Now, I'm very excited for today's video because I'm going to bring to you a solution to a mystery that I've been working on for approximately over a decade. And that mystery concerns the plot of the video game Knights of the Old Republic 2, The Sith Lords. This is a video game that came out in 2005, and I had originally gotten it in its Xbox version, Platinum Hits, when I was younger, I think 11 or 12, so around that age. And of course, I loved all things Star Wars, and so I picked it up not knowing what a cultural artifact it was. And we had the original Xbox 360, the infamous, notorious white one, and so but we had gotten the hard drive or whatever, the adapter that let me play the original Xbox games. Because to those of you who had it on the Xbox, it came out on the Xbox, not the Xbox 360. And so when I was that young, I made it. I'd say my first attempt, I made it halfway through Paragus. Uh, I, of course, had to stop when you switched to T3M4. So I think I dropped it for about a year and said, this sucks. Where are the lightsabers? I don't want to, I'm walking around gray corridors and there's this whiny bitch in my ear, not much happening. And so I went and I played some more Jedi Outcast because, that was very visceral. And instead of doing whatever I was doing in Knights of the Old Republic 2, I could enter in some cheat codes to put myself on the Yavin level, lightsaber dismemberment up to level 3, have a cow. And so that was the joy for me. But of course, eventually you get bored of that because there's only so many levels that you can replay over and over again. And so I went back to KOTOR 2, and at that point, I think I got through. I got to Citadel Station, so I made it through Paragus. It was very difficult to slog, but I was absolutely amazed that the entire game wasn't just slogging through Paragus; that there was actually more to it afterwards. Because I was so young and my little mind like just couldn't comprehend how massively arduous the game was. Um, and of course, the Xbox 360 breaks down. And, I forget how it was. I think we managed to get like a friend's um, other Xbox. And so we could continue to play our Xbox 360, so we can continue to play Xbox 360 games. But all the Xbox games, which were, quite a few, it was mostly that game and like, you see, there you go. I don't even remember the rest. Um, and so we didn't miss it very much, and I didn't miss Coda 2 very much. Well, fast forward to about say about 18, 19, around, or maybe less than, no, I was still in high school. Um, I see that it's on sale on Steam, so I end up in getting it, and I think I played through. I I think what it was. Oh, that's what it was. Yes, of course. It was. I was incredibly bored in my high school English and science classes. Um, and so to pass the time, I'd been given like an iPad for Christmas. And so I would download mobile games and play them with a miniature keyboard in front of the iPad, that made it look like it was a laptop, like I was taking notes, and instead I was playing games. What are you going to do? The American education system. And so, I got FTL, and I also got Coder 1. So I played through that. And then I liked that, and so I decided to give Coder 2 another try. Um, and again, it was like I think I made it to Citadel Station, and then I had to take another break for a year, and then try again. And eventually, I was able to play through the game. Um, and I found it an incredibly engaging game once, I think I got off Citadel Station. Once the world opens up, you get in Nar Shaddaa, great planet, and the rest of Coda 2. Really, really incredible game. But I was absorbed with the story, and the main reason I was absorbed with the story because I couldn't make heads or tails of it. There was all these religious themes in it, Star Wars itself. It's really interesting if you really take a deep dive into Star Wars, um, because Star Wars has a lineage of mythos. It didn't actually, you could say, originate with George Lucas. It was much closer to being originated by Joseph Campbell, who, of course, and Joseph Campbell, and of course all the other philosophical literary figures of that time, in which they were starting to compare and contrast myths. And they were finding out that, hey, that's really strange. There seems to be a lot of similarities between these myths of cultures that arose independently of one another. So, they weren't neighbors, or, they weren't trading with them, or, there wasn't a cross cultural contamination, so to say, that influenced their mythos to become similar. I mean, there were certainly occasions of that throughout history, but there are also a lot of occasions where independently cultures that were geographically separate from one another and didn't have any communication came up with mythoses that, obviously reflected their respective environments, the places that they were around, and used symbols that were familiar to them. But the symbology behind the symbols, what the symbols meant, often converged into the same story. And so Joseph Campbell put that together into what he titled, the hero's journey, the hero myth, and structured the what was it, like the 12 part, gosh, I should know these things, but the 12 part 12-step journey that a hero goes through towards starting as a nondescript impotent commoner to a quote unquote son of God, an Ubermensch, a hero, a mover and a shaker, someone who has the power to change the world in his image, and therefore hopefully the better. But of course, contingent on him being given this power is his worthiness of it, the deeds that he does, and thereby the morality that arises through his experiences. And so George Lucas, um, interesting enough, there's not a whole lot of literature on this, though he has lots of interviews. Um, but he takes an interest in this, and if you look at the hero's journey, it maps pretty much identically onto Star Wars. All of the archetypes of the hero's journey are there. You have, the original commoner boy who, leaves home. They have the event of the refusal of the call. They have the mentor that, mentors the guy. They have where the mentor dies and the guy has to fend for himself. Um, you have, the moment of trepidation where I don't get it, and then you have the eventual resolution of completion where I do get it. And then of course Luke successfully blows up the Death Star and returns home, and everything's hunky dory. And that's the way A New Hope ends. It takes The Empire Strikes Back to establish the context of that mythos, in that it was actually a rather small flame. But if you see it contained in the story back before it was, a trilogy, or a multi-movie mythos, just that contained in is the hero's journey, because at the end the bad guys are defeated. It's not that the Death Star's blown up, but we got the whole other empire. It's that the Death Star's blown up, the bad guy, Darth Vader, he's floating off into space, Tarkin's dead. No mention of Emperor Palpatine. That didn't exist in the mythos yet, so wrapped up in a bow, completed. And so that's what he was basing it on. Um, and so uh, if you look into George Lucas's early literature, like early stories, the stuff that he was writing originally, you come across this short story about the power of the wills, in which that's basically before A New Hope has been created. That's his proto image for midichlorians, as in something like trying to describe a material, quantifiable essence of divinity, of psychic power. Because, as we get in the prequels, in the mythos of Star Wars is the more midichlorians that you have, the more power that you have in the Force. This has been demonstrated, I guess, that certain people have varying degrees of telekinetic ability. Some are able to wave a ball around, whereas someone else is able to, stop a starship from leaving. Using the force of the power of a jet, starship engine. So varying degrees. And, the way that people liked to imagine it, sort of in the original trilogy, is that it was inexplicable and effervescent, non-specific, essentially, what made Luke who he is. It wasn't something material, it was something spiritual. It wasn't that he had a certain power level bestowed upon him at birth. It was that, the content of his character and, the courage in his heart and the spirit in his, so and so, whatever. And of course, later on, George Lucas reconsecrates that as, this wasn't a spiritual thing, this was actually a material thing, because the reason that Luke Skywalker is so powerful in the Force is because he is the son of Anakin Skywalker, who is Darth Vader, who is, one of the main antagonists in the original story, the original trilogy, and as well as, A New Hope. He doesn't, it's not that A New Hope is about Emperor Palpatine and then Darth Vader comes in Episode 5. Darth Vader's in Episode 4 and Emperor Palpatine is not in Episode 5, even though, so to speak, Emperor Palpatine, in the context of the rest of the mythos, in respect to the original New Hope, or the original Star Wars, he would be the actual head villain. Um, I hope that was clear. Um, and so, what's George playing with here is he's trying to, suss out the difference between um, a person who accumulates the power to be a force of good in the world through their spiritual nature versus their material nature. And so, what that means is that Star Wars is a type of gospel, a type of Bible, because it's not a history book. It's not about, here's the stuff that literally happened. Because everyone obviously knows that, it happened a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. They don't think that literally means a long time ago somewhere this stuff happened. And, George Lucas, I guess, bore witness to it, had the image of it zapped into his mind by God, like some of the apostles did when, they were writing down Christ crying out, asking for the cup to pass before him in Gethsemane, even though everyone else was completely asleep. That's not what they're thinking it is. They just think, this is made up. This is something that he imagined and then, captured through camera and digital effects, etc. And so it's his theorizing of moral action. Hey, the prequels, what are the prequels about? Well, a bunch of people making a lot of really stupid decisions and then everything going wrong. That's what it is. All right? Council makes really stupid decisions in regards to Anakin. Obi-Wan is stupid in his mentoring of Anakin. He's got he's inexperienced, obviously, but that leads to the point. He is stupid. The war is stupid. The Republic acts stupidly. Uh, Corrupt bureaucrats, vie for power in selfish ways. People die needlessly in skirmishes that don't serve them but greater powers. Um, there's a complete conflict of or difference in perception on who's doing what and what's going on. People think they're fighting for one thing, but instead they're fighting for another. They completely miss the creation of the clone army, et cetera, et cetera. So a bunch of stupid people make a bunch of idiotic decisions, and then all hell breaks loose. Okay, it's tragedy. Shakespeare. There you go. you know, uh, Camille Paglia, she actually included the ending Star Wars Revenge of the Sith, specifically the Mustafar fighting duel scene, as one of the most significant pieces of art made within the 21st century. So it's a pretty grand thing that he made here. But if you wanted to sum it up, it's tragedy. That's what it is. It's Shakespearean tragedy. Look at this. Look at all these guys who made bad decisions and then the consequences. Greek tragedy. Pretty clear cut. It does because it connects to the original trilogy. Obviously, it technically ends with the feeling of hope because of the birth of Luke and Leia. And that's what you would hope would happen in any sort of tragedy, is that the next thing that happens is the comedy, the success. And so then that's what happens. And so then we go into the original trilogy. And what's the original trilogy about? Uh, well, you've got Luke. Okay, let's before we break it down, let's get to the generality. It's about sacrifice, sacrificing yourself for a better future for you know humanity, I guess, or the human race, but sacrificing yourself for others. That's what it's about. A bunch of people sacrifice themselves for others, and things get a lot better. Bam. Original trilogy, selfish people making selfish decisions, hard times, weak men. Uh, Hard times bring about the strong men. What do strong men do? They sacrifice themselves for others. Good times. There you go. What does Luke do? Well, he doesn't really want to fight the Empire, but he sacrifices. He loses his family. He takes on the role of being a general in the war. He wanted to he wanted to go to Tashi Station and pick up some power converters. He refuses the call initially when Obi-Wan tries to say, "Hey, let's go fight the Empire. Come with me." He doesn't want to do this, but he sacrifices, his personal selfish desires to become the person that the galaxy needs in order to redeem Darth Vader, Anakin Skywalker, bring peace to the galaxy, or at least more peace than there was. Because getting Emperor Palpatine out of there, that's gonna cause get rid of a lot of pain and suffering. Same thing with Leia. Gets her fucking pardon my language, but her planet destroyed. People forget, I think, sometimes about the grandiosity, how insane that must have been. Only 30 years, 30 plus some, since the bomb dropped. And then here we got a super laser from space that can blow up the entire planet. Think of how that landed on the American psyche. Must have been crazy. So yeah, Han Solo, of course, very obvious example. Wants money, wants to stay alone, comes with sacrifices himself. Darth Vader, of course, in the Return of the Jedi, the whole point is that Luke redeems Darth Vader, and then Darth Vader thereby sacrifices himself to destroy the Emperor. So it's all about sacrifice. And so what does that mean? It's about moral action. Star Wars is a gospel about moral action that is told through some cool guys that wield laser swords. Okay, so George Lucas, you do a little investigation into him, um, really likes cinematography. Really likes it. Like, I'm talking um, he likes talking about cinematography. Like, what language are we going to use to describe the colors and the composition that we see here on this screen? And he would go to like light shows and like see like like the painted orange, and then they put on a red light and see how it changes. So this is the cerebral part of his brain. This is what he's interested in. And so that's part of it. And then the other part of it, as we see in his early literature on the wills, is, of course, the wills is, well, how do I decide between God working through me versus me working through my own self? That's the other thing that, is concerning him. And so he combines those two things in making a movie. So what looks really cool? What looks really cool is a stark white hallway with a bunch of guys wielding laser pistols, and then a bunch of guys clad in white armor but with dark shadows coming out, and they're faceless versus the guys that have faces. That's cool. There's a contrast there. And then what comes out after all the white? A giant black figure, and that is contrast against everyone else again. And you have these really cool droids, tall, metallic, and then the other one that's short and wheels around. Oh, that's kind of novel. That's neat. And then you have these giant, wide expanses. I mean, one of the most historic shots in Star Wars is Luke Skywalker walking up a giant sand hill and then looking at the twin suns. Why is that in Star Wars? How does that relate to the plot? How does that relate to anything that's going on? The Empire, the galaxy? Why is it being given attention in the movie? Because it's cool. Because it looks cool. Because when an audience member sees it, because when George Lucas was originally creating, the original Star Wars, A New Hope, he wasn't thinking about creating a mythos. He didn't have Anakin Skywalker in his mind. He wasn't thinking about, the Mustafar duel between him and Obi-Wan Kenobi. He was thinking, how do I hold this camera at the right angle to catch the light to make this look really cool? That was primarily what his concern was. And so all this other stuff, once he, mastered that, and especially, geez, I mean, once especially you got the digital effects, all the money that he invested in that. Well, once that got, he got command and mastery of that. That's when he shifts more into the moralizing. That's why you got Ewoks. What are Ewoks meant to represent? Well, they're meant to represent innocence. There wasn't enough innocence in the story. He wanted to bring in more innocence. And you could say, action figures and collectibles, and that's all part of it. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But and that's when he goes on to the prequel trilogy, and that's when it gets really moralizing, because tragedies are always more moralizing than hero stories, because it's always more moralizing to tell someone not to do something than to tell someone to do something. So Star Wars is chock full of an opinion on the natural laws of the universe and the implicit morality that you should adopt in order to be in harmony with those laws. It has, through its mythos with the Force, this implicit sense of right, sense of balance, sense of peace and harmony. And the Jedi, or the religion of the Star Wars mythos, the metaphysicists, believe and practice in being harmonizing with this force. And so, that's the implicit morality, is the force knows what's right and knows what it's doing. Harmonize with the force. And it's, and so obviously you hear that and you say, I've heard that before in real life. Because if you look at interpretations of religion, a lot of them say, well, there is a omnipresent, omniscient, omnipotent being that sees and does everything, that is the progenitor and you know, has the right idea on everything what to do. And so you're supposed to go to him to ask for what you should do. You're supposed to try to align your values and behaviors and actions with what he would want you to do, what he would order, what he would command, commandments, etc. And so, same thing with the Force. But whereas in, I guess you could say, real life religions, where they implicitly, they have the religious doctrine that says, come out and do this. Star Wars is a movie. Star Wars is video games and books. It was commercialized, and culturalized, as a means of deflecting that it was a pronouncement, on a type of morality. And the reason why I didn't really cause all those many waves was because the morality was, a pretty good morality. Be courageous, stick up for others, defeat the evil tyrannical force that wants to hurt people, believe in a benevolent force outside of yourself, believe that there's good in everyone and redemptive power in everyone, and believe that everything works out in the end. And there you go. I mean, those are pretty good moral statutes. And lots of that is mimicked in what you would call "quote unquote" real life religion. If you open books like the Bible or the Quran or the Mahabharata or et cetera, et cetera. Or listen to a monk, to the oral tradition. And so if you're going to interact with Star Wars, you're necessarily going to interact with a religion, a philosophy, an implicit morality based on the actions of the characters in the mythos. This has gone as far as there are certain people who identify as Jedi, in this world, register as Jedi as a religion, and will quote unquote practice Jedi tenets, and through the practice of meditation and generosity and helping out with service, nonviolence, but also martial ability. So the ability to use violence when appropriate and necessary to defend the defenseless or the weak, etc. And I'm sure some of this is LARPing, but I'm also sure that some people will take this with complete sincerity. And, who's to really denounce them or blame them? They found a core set of values that appeals to them, a mythos that appeals to them. And, it's not a mythos that says take advantage of people and, do heinous deeds. So, why not God bless them? And so the point that I'm making is this isn't just a, what you could say a kid's show. It wouldn't have endured if it was just a kid's show, because the point of the story is that it's tackling, timeless, significant, relevant themes. And so you become enthralled and interested by it because you want to absorb its psychic truth. You want to say, hey, I want to be like Luke Skywalker. I want to be courageous in the face of value. I want to find someone who thinks that they're hateful and irredeemable and convince them to instead be hopeful and kind and generous. Obviously Darth Vader, he doesn't get that much opportunity, but he hits it where it counts. And, who knows what he would have done if he would have lived. Walk of Atonement, probably, something like that. I mean, he would have gone on, become a monk, gave up everything, and would have tried to be only of service. And how great would that be? And not only that, if you follow Luke Skywalker into the extended universe, which I always like to do because that's the mythos that I personally enjoy the most. He kind of turns on to be what actually ended up being a criticism. He turns into Space Jesus. Incredibly powerful, benevolent guy who doesn't really seem to have any real personal, like selfish behaviors or thoughts. Certainly a lot of confusion, certainly a lot of anxiety and apprehension, but no, he doesn't crash out like he does in the sequels, and that icky stuff. And all he tries to do is to teach people to be kind and generous and loving. That's a big thing too. You could say that really his one thing that he does that isn't completely selfless is get married. And that's pretty good because marriage is, you could say, ideally is complete selfless act because you're going to give yourself wholly to the other person. So in a sense, even that's a selfless act. But yeah, so he becomes Space Jesus, and all the other characters also represent strength and persistence. And so you watch the stories for the same reason why someone who I guess you could say were Christian would read the New Testament over and over again. You're trying to absorb the psychic truth, the psychic energy of the actions of Jesus. Well, Jesus did this, and that was really kind and generous. He said this wisdom, or he healed this man, or he comforted this woman, or he brought this guy back to life. And while I guess maybe I not may be able to do exactly those things, but I can still extend my hand and do my best to remain peaceful and kind and loving. Bam. And so the same thing with Star Wars. It's just it's more accessible because they've got laser swords. I really mean that because the accessibility comes from the implied distance. The fantastical setting because it's not as immediate as something like the gospel. Because in the gospel, the point is that they're all people, they're all human beings that lived and walked the earth, and so that makes it a lot more visceral and relatable. And the things that he talks about are actionable things that you can do in your life today. Whereas, when it comes to Star Wars, yes, you can be courageous and kind and generous, but you're not going to need to pick up any power converters. Well, maybe you are, I guess. But you're not going to need to know how to take out battle droids or fly a spaceship or navigate Coruscant because they're not real places. They don't exist. It's not those parts are for the delight of an audience member, the delight of a reader, a viewer. It's not actually relevant to value structures because it's not real. And so that is the actual tension of this, and why people want to wholly discredit the mythos of Star Wars is because at its core it's fantastical. It's about people with supernatural psychic kinetic powers, flying around the galaxy in starships with laser swords and deflecting laser bolts from laser guns against battle droids and super evil witches or wizards or whatever. So it's not completely grounded in reality. But just because it's not completely grounded in reality doesn't mean you can't get out the value structure. And of course, as I was giving before, the cultural pull that Star Wars had and continues to have is that the exact evidence of the applicability of the moral literature. And again, why it endures is because it's hidden in this fantasy setting. So it makes it non-real enough that you don't have to immediately participate. So that was a very long prelude. But I hope you stay with me because now we're going to get to KOTOR 2. Um, because Chris Avalon was the writer of KOTOR 2. And Chris, Chris Avalon then added onto the Star Wars mythos and remixed it and created his own mythos inside the Star Wars universe. Um, you could say, in a sense, if you wanted to track it, um, you get from sort of Nietzsche young to Joseph Campbell to George Lucas, and then from George Lucas, you get Chris Avalon. So here's the production of the pattern of thought. So what was George Lucas trying to do? He was trying to say, here's clear moral instruction. Do the right thing, be the good guy, defeat the bad guy, bring peace. And then with the prequels, obviously there's more moral gray, but essentially the idea is don't be like these people, you know? Um, don't be stupid and selfish and short sighted, um, and or else, hard times come in. Well, Chris Avalon wrote KOTOR 2 as, hey, what's going on? He said, hey, wait a second, why am I here? Um, and so, the original trilogy, and again, the prequels, you could say, are sort of three-dimensional mapping of your journey through, the heroic journey, the heroic path. Whereas KOTOR 2 is a actual four-dimensional game in which you're trying to step outside the path and comment on the path itself. This is at the core of, of course, the most famous character of the game is Kreia. And what is Kreia's, central value structure? It's that, well, here we are going on hero's journeys all the time, but I don't understand why this hero's journey exists. I don't understand what circumstances keep arising in order to create these heroes, because hero sort of necessitates a villain to fight against and eventually dispatch. It's not, if Luke if Luke stayed on the farm and the Death Star blew up on its own and the Empire went away and everything was peaceful, Luke wouldn't be a hero because he didn't do anything. He would have been going to Tash Station picking up power converters. Um, so in order to have the hero's journey, we need an empire. Well, hey, where's that empire coming from? What's up with that? Why do we start in conflict? I just got here. I was just born. Um, if you want to go up and look at it again, how it relates to real life uh, religion, I guess you could say, real life biblical narrative. It's something like, well, a long, long time ago, people are, they haven't agreed exactly on when, but sometime long ago, uh, some people, let's say, made a mistake and upset God, and now we're all cursed because of it. Well, hey, well, hey, what about me? What about me and my family? We just got here. Sure, we would have been born, but I was just born. Well, I didn't talk to no snake. I didn't eat no fruit. So what's up with me bearing this curse? That's that's not on me. So I don't understand why uh, the world is having all these issues when I haven't done anything because I just arrived. And this is the point that Cray is making. The point that Cray is making is, um, it's real lovely that Luke went on this wonderful journey. Um, but how was it that that journey happened? Well, in order to facilitate the journey of Luke eventually becoming a Jedi and, defeating Emperor Palpatine and restoring balance to the Force and peace to the galaxy, etc., what has to happen? Well, let's take the most obvious example. Alderaan has to blow up. The whole planet of Alderaan explodes. Billions of people die. Well, why? Well, because of the Empire. Well, where did this Empire come from? Where, what's up with that? I guess you could say if I were to pretend to be a Jedi, you could say I pretend to be. I pray to the light side of the Force. I harmonize. I'm with peace. What's with this dark side? What's with this pull for people to accumulate power and then oppress and torture and destroy people? Uh, because Kreia finds out about the dark side and the nature of the Force when she's training Scion and Nihilus, or Nihilus, take your pick. She finds out that the dark side actually can't be controlled, that it's a bottomless pit, that it necessarily overpowers the user invariably. There's no controlling it whatsoever. And she experimented on these guys and she manipulated them and she tried to get them to see, no, don't let the dark side use you. Don't succumb to your basic, selfish, immediate instinct. Instead, look long term and then use the dark side as a means of obtaining that long term goal. And every single time they could not resist, they let the dark side overpower them because Kreia was saying, wait, and the dark side was saying, go. I am giving you power now. Use it now. Enjoy this now. Take this now. Kill now, etc., etc., etc. And so, the dark side is a bottomless pit. She thought that people were using the light side because they were actually, she thought it was slave morality. It was a bunch of people weak and scared and hiding of their own true power and, what they could do to shape the world to be better if they actually took power into their own hands. And, she found out power corrupts. And, because she didn't believe it yet because people told her that that's what happened, but she hadn't seen it in experience. But then she witnessed the corruptive power on Scion and Nihilus, and because what happens eventually? They say, "Hey, this bitch is getting in our way and keeps yapping in our ear and telling us what to do, and I'm pretty sure that we know what to do." Even though, of course, Kreia is obviously more wise and far-sighted and intelligent than they are, they're blinded by their lust for power. And so they betray her and they cast her out. And once she's betrayed, she says, oh, blast. Sith spit. I didn't realize that the dark side is actually uncontrollable and will always necessarily take over the user, once a certain threshold is broken. There's not a ability to wrangle it. And so here's the question. Then what in the world is the point of the dark side? Why is it available to people if it is nothing but a corruptive, parasitical, black, bottomless pit? Why have it here? Why have people mistake what it is? Why have them be blinded by lust for power and then them self-destruct and take innocence along the way? Why have the option for people to just wreck and ruin everything for no actual benefit? Because initially she believed, and this was what Revan believed too, is that, hey, if I can channel my rage and hatred and aggression as well as my fear, you know, those things will, biochemically even release cortisol and adrenaline and will make me sharper and stronger in battle, and I can draw upon those emotions, the psychic energy, in order to increase my martial prowess. And so when he's fighting, he says, well, you know, if I'm fighting with the light side, we take this many casualties. But if I fight with the dark side, we take less casualties because I'm actually much more potent adversary, and so I can kill enemy soldiers faster, thereby resulting in less people dying overall. Because again, they're fighting Mandalorians. These are like these are barbarians. These are battle monks essentially. Their morality and creed is in warfare. They're not rebelling. Bygone commoners. They're fighting to the death. They're fighting to the last and they're trying to kill. So the faster you kill them, the faster everyone in general stops dying. Well, what's the problem with that? Well, the problem with that is that the use of the dark side starts to become addictive. You start to say, well, hey, that time I got this much angry and this much fearful and I did this much damage, but this time I let myself go even farther and get even more enraged and more fearful, and I did even more damage, and so I killed even more people faster. And so if I channel into this, I can become a killing machine. And this is a good thing because I'm put in a circumstance by the Force in which, unless I want to let billions of people die and or be enslaved, I have to become a killing machine. And so, that's his reasoning. And so, you get addicted to it, and you start to want to use it more and more. And the way that you can tell that you start getting addicted to it is you fight, let's say, you fight a handful of skirmishes with ever-increasing numbers, and you're tapping more and more into your rage and fear in order to make you an elite killing machine, until eventually you come to a great battle. That's still a skirmish, but it's a large skirmish, and so you really tap in, and so you're really into it, and you really are in awe at your ability to kill, and of course, thereby save lives, the lives of your own men. Well, after this large skirmish, then comes next a small skirmish, and so you don't need to get as angry or as enraged or as fearful, and that bothers you. You start to regret not being able to tap into that ability because of how powerful you felt in being able to dispatch so many people and save so many people's lives. And you start to look for opportunities upon which you can wield that power, and capture that feeling again. And it starts to change your behavior. And worst of all, what eventually happens is, and if Revan, if Revan did all of this, and then, afterwards went back to the council, and the council were all a bunch of incredibly understanding, generous, kind, welcoming people, and they counseled Revan, and they healed him. It's incredibly possible that he would have been able to be in a position to get this dark side out of him, get this behavior out of him, this corruptive thought pattern, this desire for violence out of him, and he would have been all right. But of course, in the circumstances that Revan's in, he is, because he left to fight the Mandalorians, he's no longer welcomed back by the council, to the point where it's very likely that they're going to go to war after the Mandalorian Wars is done, and he's already fighting the Mandalorians themselves as the key general, as the leader of the whole army. And so he has the whole army's pressure on his back. And so he doesn't have an opportunity to go and seek help and calm himself and meditate and balance himself out. No, he is beset by warfare. And so he's going to succumb to the desire for warfare. And what happens if you can't find enough? You're going to go try to find it and seek it out. And that's going to change in your behavior. And so he's going to become more violent with everyone, including the people in his own army. And, that in turn is going to make them more violent. And this cycle and propagation of violence just spreads out the more that it's done and used. And so Revan does this, and of course, he ends up turning to the dark side. He's you thought that he's him because you play him in KOTOR 1, and he's treated like the Jesus of KOTOR 2 or of KOTOR. But he doesn't make it. He succumbs to the dark side. Even if Kreia wants to say, "Oh, it was a sacrifice," like, yeah, sure, it was a sacrifice. Malachor 5 was a sacrifice, all right. It was a blood sacrifice as a Sith. He didn't sacrifice thousands of Jedi lives to for some greater good. He was scared about what the Sith Empire or whatever, and we can get into that a little bit. But regardless, he was fighting. And, he was going to not let anyone get in his way or tell him what to do. And so what's Kreia's upset about? She's upset about the circumstances of this. She's upset that Revan was put into the circumstances that made him who he is. She's upset that she was put into the circumstances upon the Jedi Order being insufficient. That's that's a key one right there for Kreia. Kreia is inquisitive and intelligent and wants to know what's going on, and ends up in a society in which people don't really know. Always there were more questions. People didn't have the answers. The Jedi didn't have the answers. And so she's born into circumstances upon which her society is ignorant. And what happens to ignorant societies? Well, they either learn or they get, clobbered. And so the Jedi ended up getting clobbered because they didn't know who they were. The Jedi they couldn't unify themselves under their value structure because they were ignorant of who they truly were. And so they had a theological civil war on the grounds of violence, and it split the order. Well, an order wouldn't have been split if the counselors of the Jedi Order, the council, would have known what to do. Would have been better leaders. Would have had a better grip on the doctrine of the Jedi. Would have made the Jedi feel like, they're not just sitting around watching people die because they're scared. I mean, why else does Revan go to war? Revan goes to war because the council doesn't. Because the council says, we have a bad feeling about this. We're going to wait. Wait and do what? Well, we don't know. Okay? They don't know. And so Kreia's like, well, why didn't the Jedi know? Why didn't anyone tell me? Why didn't anyone let me know that the Jedi don't know? And that all they had to do was be tested and they would crumble. See? And then they're tested and then they crumble. They split apart. And then, at the end of the Jedi Civil War, the Jedi are completely destroyed except for the exile. And, all his friends. And so then, of course, what she has the circumstances of her own ignorance. And when she goes off to war and thinks, hey, we're gonna really test the Jedi Order now. We're gonna be order secessionists. We're gonna come up with a new Jedi code. that's not of inactions and nonviolence, but helps to protect people at the end of this war. And, of course, the war goes very poorly. And so being um, instead of being the noble crusaders that she had hoped, all the Jedi that go off to war become corrupted and don't make it out. It's the same motif with the Moonlight Sword, Lawrence. They become hunters of beasts because they think there's this great evil other and we need to defeat them and protect them. And what happens? They get addicted to violence and the power of defeating beasts, and then become beasts themselves. And he had hoped that he had led a regiment of hunters that would not succumb to beasthood and instead would, remain noble, benevolent, peaceful human beings that fought only when necessary and didn't get addicted to bloodshed. And they don't. They succumb. And they become beasts, and you, as a hunter, come in and kill a lot of them. Oh well. Same thing here. So, bam, another circumstance. Turns out the Jedi aren't noble. So that sucks to happen too. And then we get to, and so, of course, the dark side, like I already said, is that, oh, shoot, the dark side isn't something to be controlled. And so she says, well, then what in the world am I doing here? What the world is the point of all this? Why was I born into an ignorant, and not to mention the Republic being a decadent, bureaucratic, possibly corrupt. I think definitely corrupt government system as well. So why was I born into an ignorant, decadent government that was then tested by a you could say like psychopathic barbarian martial culture horde that ruptured the religion that I grew up believing in, and then I went and fought in the war, fell in love, had that person killed, lost everything, became incredibly resentful and hateful, tried to manipulate, the ultimate Sith power into destroying the galaxy, got utterly humbled, and then now is just, walking around as an old crone without any real power. Obviously she demonstrates that she still has, quite a bit of, forceability, but, she's not holding the reins of a Scion and Nihilus anymore. So she has to do everything herself. And, she's an old woman. She doesn't, I guess, it's pretty impressive that, she keeps up with you in all your quests if you have her as a companion, but, I would imagine as an old woman, she'd really rather be sitting around, which is why, when you see her, she's usually just sitting meditating. And so she doesn't get it. She doesn't get why all this had to happen. She doesn't get the Force. She thinks the Force is stupid, greedy, unfair, malevolent. And what she levies as evidence against the Force is simultaneously history of conflict, the cycle of wars in that bring balance to the Force, commiserated by her own personal experience of this event. And so she's like, the world is like a giant washing machine that just spins round and round in a pattern while the inhabitants get all, banged around. But without any input. That's I guess you could say at its core, Kreia is upset that there's taxation without representation. The Force has a will, that it has a destiny for us all. We wield it, but it controls us all, and I find that abhorrent. I hate because I hate the Force. I hate that it would have a will. I hate that it would, force people to do things in order to create balance. Uh, well, you would only hate that if you think that you're getting a bad deal. you know, it's like if you had a personal chef and every night the chef brought out an amazing, delicious, nutritious meal, but he wouldn't tell you what it would be. He would decide for himself what it was going to be. You wouldn't complain. You wouldn't say, "Well, gosh, I this delicious, nutritious meal is great, but I can't enjoy it because I don't know what's gonna what's gonna happen. I don't know what I'm gonna eat because what if I feel like pizza and I end up getting spaghetti or something like that." But of course, if you have a personal chef and the chef brings out only stuff that you're not interested in, let's say you hate seafood and the only thing he makes is oysters and cod liver, you're gonna say, well, hey, this is really unfair. I'd sure like to be able to pick my own meals because what's being picked for me sucks. I don't like it and I don't want it. So why can't I just choose what I want to eat? Same thing with Kreia. Taxation without representation. The Force is orchestrating circumstances that cause me to act. Because this is the point about the Force, and the point about echoes is that echoes are the metaphysics of the Force. Okay? So if you. Here's a material analogy. If you're walking down a path and there's a hill next to you and a giant boulder starts rolling down, then you're not going to be able to stop it because of the momentum that the boulder has got in its descent. However, if it's standing there right up on the edge, you can rest your hand on it and it won't fall down because it hasn't gathered any momentum itself yet. And so her point is that there's all these emotional, psychical boulders of momentum that are flying around the galaxy all the time, influencing people and what to do. Here's probably a better example is the assassination of Archduke Fernand Fernandez, or Fernandez? Yeah, Archduke Fernandez, I think. I hope. Anyways, the Archduke. That's one event, but they say that one event triggered World War One. Well, actually, it was the triggering of several echoes surrounding the event, because there was already incredible tension all over the place. And so all it needed was that one echo to send all the other echoes in motion. And so that's the point that Kreia is making, is that, hey, look, I'm getting here, and there's all these echoes flying around that I had no input in their creation. Because she found out that what she can do is she can create her own echo. And that's actually, her own echo is the exile. Her project is the exile. I'm going to create a set of circumstances in order to put the exile into a set of circumstances in order to manipulate him. From a moment I awoke, I have used you. I used you to gather the Jedi and tell them that they were a bunch of numbskulls. I used you in order to kill Silas and Nihilon, Silas and Nihilon, Nihilus and Scion. I used you to make me feel better about myself and my teachings. And so, yeah, she's manipulating him from the whole time. Okay, yeah, where was I? Yeah, echoes. And so, yeah, so she realizes what an echo is, but her concern is is that the Force is the original progenitor of all these echoes, and then makes them willy nilly and gives them momentum that no one can stand up to. Because again, it's depending on the weight of the boulder, but something's coming down at you. If you're a real scrawny guy, you're short and you're emaciated, well then yeah, that's probably going to bowl you over. But I mean, if you're some, if you're Andre the Giant, some 8'4", 300 pound, genetic, uh, because of your genetics, let's say, well then you're going to actually be able to end up stopping that boulder again, depending on its size and the momentum. But the point is that the more will that you yourself have, because that's a material example, but we're talking about psychic things, the more ability that you have in your ability to resist and live your own truth, do what you say, then that's your own specific will. However, the Force will orchestrate circumstances upon which that will get superseded, because a boulder the size of a house is coming at you at 50 miles an hour. Doesn't matter how strong you are. You could be, well, I guess it would matter how strong you are technically, but you wouldn't. There wouldn't be a human being strong enough in order to resist that. And so this is what happens with the Mandalorian War: is um, the Republic would have stayed, peaceful for, who knows for how long, but they wouldn't have been tested by the Mandalorians. And, she talks about cultures needing conflict and that the Republic was untested. Well, is that her philosophy? No, it's her observation of the Force. That what happens? Well, society becomes ignorant and decadent and for too long remains untested. Well, some force is going to come and test them. And that's how the Force works, because the Force needs balance. So if you're, screwing up, the Force isn't going to let that go. It's going to send some guy to challenge you when you're off kilter. Because, it wants you to stay on kilter. And it doesn't matter how many individual people die, because it's about the eventual balance of the Force. So here's the great mystery, and the solution to that great mystery. Because I myself, I took Cray into my psyche for a very long time. I believed what she believed, which was essentially that God was corrupt and He had it out for us, and He doesn't allow us free will, and He instead forces all these horrible things to happen to innocent people, and so thereby our our value structure should be centering around figuring out ways how to kill God. Same way Cray wants to kill the Force. What's in a name? Force, God, universe, source, Muhammad, Christ, Buddha, Chi, Tao, etc. The power that be. Um, and I wrestled with KOTOR 2 for a very long time until I finally came to this conclusion, which is why does the Mandalorian Wars happen? And the reason is because of the Sith Empire. And I imagine this was going to be a lot more fleshed out in KOTOR 3. God, I would hope it would actually happen. I don't have any hope for it, though. Um, whoa. What are you going to do? But it's the Sith Empire at the root cause of the Mandalorian Wars, not the Force. It's actually the Sith Empire. And it's a devastating realization, because it means that, the whole point of KOTOR 2 is wrestling with the circumstances that God puts us in. But if you really read KOTOR 2, you really read the plot and between the lines, you find out that the real culprit is, again, just another human being. It's not some otherworldly, omnipotent, powerful force that is forcing its whims and wills on other people. It's actually a human being doing that, or a group of human beings. And they're doing it using the power of the force. And so that is where the point of KOTOR 2 is unearthed. That's the secret. That, the actual secret of KOTOR 2, even though Kreia says there is no secret, there is a secret, and the secret is Kreia blames the Force because she mistakes um, power for agency. And the reason for that is if you think about the Force as being something that is completely all powerful, then it wouldn't have any context upon which to act. It wouldn't have any circumstances upon which to act. That goes for there's an old Jewish riddle for this, which is what is a omnipotent, omnipresent, omniscient being lack? And what a you would think nothing, but the answer is limitation. It lacks limitation. Human beings have limitation. That's what makes them human. God or source or whatever word you want to say, let's say the force for now, doesn't have limitation. And so it doesn't have a value structure for action of obtaining something because it doesn't have any wants or needs or lacks. It doesn't need or want anything. Um, Even this idea of balance, it's like saying that water wants to, rise to equilibrium. Uh, that's not really, the water doesn't really quite have a will. You know, the water doesn't the water doesn't decide to rise to equilibrium in any container. It doesn't do that because it wants to, or because that's its value structure. That's the right thing for it to do, like, because it's been taught growing up, so to speak. It just reacts as it is because of how it is, and it's the same thing with the force. The force itself doesn't have a will. That's that's her mistake. Really, the force doesn't have a will. So what happens? Well, you've got the Sith Empire, and so what's the Sith Empire? The Sith Empire are a bunch of miserable, isolated, angry, resentful, ridiculous, whacked out old men living isolated on a planet in the middle of nowhere, desperately plotting how to make everyone do what they tell them to. I can't express enough how pathetic it is. And this is key. The Sith Empire is not grand or cool or, awesome or anything like that. It's a bunch of whiny losers who haven't gotten what they want, or haven't been told no, or haven't been taught manners, or haven't been socialized. And so they resent other people. They don't like other people. They don't even like each other, but they partner together because they have their common goal. And, they all have plans to backstab each other once that's realized. But I mean, they're deceitful, uh, they're insincere, um, they are untrusting, and they feel like they deserve the entire world. And so they spend all of their time thinking, how am I going to get the power to get people to do what I tell them to? How am I going to get the power to wield over someone in order to make me feel good about myself, in order to make me feel empowered, in order to make me feel important? How am I going to abuse and oppress other people to satisfy that emotional need that I have? Because they're so few and they're so limited and they lack so little manpower. but they have the Sith magic, and that's powerful. But if they come out and try to like just announce themselves to the Republic and say, "Hey, do what we tell you," they're going to be overwhelmed because the Republic is so large, and also because the Jedi themselves, would come out and stop them. And they couldn't take on the Jedi and the Republic, even with all their Sith magic or whatever that they can do. There's too few of them. They lack that power, but they don't make peace with that. They don't say, okay, we'll live over here and rule over here in our kingdom, and you guys can do over that. No, they have a crippling insecurity, and so they have a crippling need to oppress, um, everyone else that they see as not worthy, and they basically see themselves as worthy, and maybe a few other choice people that they create a parasocial relationship with. And you can see all of this in the Sith Academy in KOTOR 1. It's full of a bunch of stupid, short-sighted, selfish people making stupid, short-sighted, selfish mistakes. But what are you going to do? But the point about the Sith Empire is that they managed to do what Kreia was trying to do, which was far-sighted evil. It's the same thing with Emperor Palpatine. It's why he's successful. It's because he is being sustainably evil. He is giving into the dark side sustainably, or at least so he thinks. It's sustainably is being thrown down an elevator shaft by your apprentice. That doesn't sound very sustainable to me. But the point is that it looked like it was going pretty good for a while because he got the Empire and he got a Death Star and two of them, and all these starships and people and stormtroopers, etc. It looked like what he was doing was working, but then he got thrown down an elevator shaft, so it doesn't work. And the Sith Empire eventually they get defeated, so it doesn't work. But it's working for right now because they've been able to uh, control themselves enough that they haven't gotten too much trouble. Because that's eventually what happens with the Sith is they get addicted to getting themselves into trouble up until the point in which you get yourself into too much trouble and then you die. Uh, it's a perfect example with Neelis. He's looking for a fight. He's looking to, suck some soul juice, devour some people's essence, and he ends up getting himself into trouble. He ends up picking a fight that he can't win. You could sort of say with Cyan. Cyan is sort of a different beast. But you just look through all the Sith literature. What happens? They get into a fight they can't win. Darth Maul. There you go. Or Count Dooku. Another perfect example. Count Dooku didn't think he was going to die. He didn't think that that was where the end of his life was going to take place. He thought he was going to defeat Anakin and Obi-Wan, or something. He thought something else. He didn't realize that the nature of the dark side is that I get betrayed and then I die. And so then he got betrayed and then he died. But again, these Sith have managed to stall their comeuppance for long enough. So what do the Sith do? What do the true Sith do? The Sith Empire, what do they do? What's their master plan? If they lack the manpower for their own frontal assault, how else? Well, you could think, you've got subterfuge, assassination, espionage, sabotage, etc., stuff like that. You wage a secret guerrilla war, something like that. That's not what they do. What they do is they incite the Mandalorians into attacking the Republic. Now, this gets a little bit into speculation, certainly. So, this is sort of territory where this isn't based on something that other people wrote. This is based on what I'm imagining in my own mind. So you tell me whether or not it seems applicable. But the Sith Empire incited the Mandalorians into attacking the Republic because that simultaneously destroys the Mandalorians and the Republic, as well as fractures the Jedi Order. And so what we see at KOTOR 2 is not actually um, man, I guess, wrestling with God, you could say, but man wrestling with man, wrestling with the sin of man. You know, sin being used in its metaphysical sense, not its moralistic religious sense. Because all of this happens not because of force, but because of a bunch of hateful, bitter, resentful, pathetic losers who want to hurt and oppress everyone else. Uh, and so they incite this. They're the chief echo, among with all the other echoes. And so this is discovered by the exile. And supposedly this is, hopefully transmitted to Kreia at the end. If you managed, if you could have managed to talk her out of it, as you could say, hey, actually, this wasn't the Force. This was us, human beings. This was all of us. And this was because the Republic was decadent, because the Jedi were ignorant. This is because the Mandalorians were short-sighted and brutish, and because the Sith Empire were bitter and resentful. All these people, unsatisfied people, making mistakes. That converges into what Malachor 5. And why is Malachor 5 important? Because it's the moment where everyone realizes what's going on, where everyone realizes what happened. Everyone realizes we've stepped into new territory. Because the exile freezes after setting off the bomb in Malachor 5. Why? Because she realizes, hey, maybe we shouldn't be doing this. Maybe this was actually a bad idea. Maybe actually sacrificing thousands of people to kill tens of thousands more is uh, not a tenable action of behavior. Maybe I shouldn't have done that. Um, Maybe I got swept up in the war. Maybe I broke my own rules. Maybe I thought I was doing it for the greater good. Maybe I lost myself and thought it was okay to sacrifice other people for the long term. And you might notice that this was actually the philosophy of the council, because the council was willing to sacrifice the peoples of the outer rim worlds in order to better assess the situation, because they were confused, they didn't know what to do, they were afraid of what the war was going to do to their Jedi. And so instead of immediately acting without thinking, in order to prevent the massacre and enslavement of the Outer Rim worlds, they instead said, well, we'll let those people be massacred and enslaved for now while we figure out what to do. So we're sacrificing, because if we misstep, this could be catastrophic and more people could be injured than if we just wait. So we're going to sacrifice a small amount of people for the greater good. What does the exile do? Sacrifices a small amount of people for the greater good. I used my soldiers to lure enemy soldiers into an ambush? No, into a bomb. People didn't jump out, hiding under bushes to, fight them. A bomb went off and everyone in the lure died, including their own soldiers. They didn't get out. They died too. And so the exile realizes, oh, it's my own short sightedness that brought this about. It was my own blindness that allowed this to happen. This wasn't the Force that compelled me to. I made a choice, and that choice ended up being a choice that resulted in the deaths of thousands by my hand. And for what? Well, for not a whole lot good. Because even though the Mandalorians are defeated at Malachor 5, immediately the Jedi turn around and have a civil war. So how important was it defeating the Mandalorians? How important was that decisive blow? What did that accomplish? What peace did that bring? What good did that bring? And prosperity and kindness to people? Not a whole lot. Kreia thinks it was the Force. The exile realizes it was me plus all of us. And so the exile accepts both the things that are inside of her control and outside of her control and moves on and says, well, that sucked. Everyone made a lot of stupid errors there, and a lot of people got hurt, both people who deserved it and the innocent. So instead of, trying to kill God over it, trying to get revenge over God over it, I'm instead going to try to become the type of person where I can make it so something like that won't happen again. Not by killing God and destroying circumstances, but by acting in such a way that I bring peace and kindness and generosity and brotherhood to people, and selflessness, and right action instead of stupid, short-sighted decisions that are self-destructive. And you would hope that Kreia would join the exile on this, but I suppose Kreia is too bitter and old, and so she just wants to have a death so she can be done, and hope that the exile does the right thing. But what are you going to do? So there's KOTOR 2. That's what it's about. You thought it was about the Force trying to do something to the player character. That's not what it's about at all. It's about people realizing that they are the makers of their own universe, and thereby they have to take responsibility for the universe. Pretty cool. Pretty darn cool. Well, I think that was good for this video. As always, my name is Matthew Carnegie, and I say, keep the faith.